Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Ask Me Anything About Employment with Len Statham. My name is David Blair, and I'll be your moderator today. This webinar is not a but an interactive question and answer period. For the next hour, Len will take any questions you have related to employment activation. Let's get started. So the unemployment rate is not our biggest problem. It's the lack of participation in the workforce. Today, we will have an honest conversation about what we need to do as a community to change this unsettling dynamic. This Ask Me Anything topic is a call to arms to empower both providers and individuals with lived experience to begin the conversation to have. In particular, why are we settling only for public benefits and how can we activate individuals towards employment? Len Statham is the Director of Employment and Economic Self-Sufficiency Initiatives with the New York Association of Psychiatric Rehabilitation Services. He has worked with people with mental health and substance use issues for more than 20 years, promoting recovery-focused services and service provision. Combining his clinical and vocational background, Mr. Statham provides training and technical assistance about employment services and the capabilities of people with behavioral health issues to providers and to people in recovery across New York State and nationally. He has helped facilitate the adoption of the individual placement and support model of supported employment statewide in Utah, New Jersey, Wisconsin, and Colorado. That's quite a number of states there, Lynn. Mr. Statham also works at the national level on SAMHSA's bringing recovery supports to scale technical assistance center strategy initiatives, as well as Boston University Center for Psychiatric Rehabilitation. Additionally, Len has previously provided training for the National Development and Research Institute's Addiction Technology Transfer Center, ATTC, for projects in New York and New Jersey. Today's event is jointly funded by the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research and the Center for Mental Health Services within the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. The content of this webinar does not represent the views or policies of the funding agencies, and you should not assume endorsement by the federal government. During registration for the event, you are given the opportunity to submit questions in advance. Over the course of the webinar, we will alternate between questions submitted in advance and the ones you have today. So hopefully we can have a lively conversation. You may ask questions now by typing them into the chat box or by letting you know you'd like to ask it by phone, and then you can have a conversation with Len. So welcome to the webinar, and I hope you enjoy the next hour. Len, we're going to start with some of the questions that were actually in the announcement that went out for this event, because I think they're a great starting place. And let's start with the top of the line one, which is, why are we settling for public benefits, and how can we activate individuals towards employment?
Thank you, David, and good afternoon, everybody. Good morning to you folks on the West Coast. So that question is a question that I get asked quite a bit, and the biggest problem that we're having is we're not targeting a lot of our approaches to people that have said no to employment. In other words, we have IPS, which is individual placement and support, and that is an evidence-based practice that is a very good practice, and it's been researched to death, really. It's been across disabilities, many different countries, and it's the model by which people with disabilities can obtain employment. The problem is that is for the population that have already raised their hand. And so there's a great number of folks that are not raising their hand and saying, yes, I want employment. And David, I'm wondering if you might just bring up our only graphic, because that will really give some data to support what I'm saying. So these were the labor participation rates according to the Office of Disability Employment, which is a federal agency that takes a look at labor policy. And you can see that in the red, with unemployment rate for people with disabilities is actually 8.5%, twice as much as the general population, which isn't good. And we spend a lot of time on that 8.5 population. However, if you look at the labor force participation, that is those folks that are not raising their hand and being looking for work actively. The general population is usually around that 69%, We've had it as low as 65 at times, but it's between 65 and 70%. But people with disabilities is an abysmal 20.2%. And so that leaves us with about 80% of people with disabilities that are actually not in the workforce. And that is what we really need to start paying attention to, and helping people to start changing their minds about employment. Now, for the longest time, I have made the mistake of going about engaging people around employment in this way. I would tell them about how great employment is and how wonderful it is and how it gives them self-esteem and how it gives them a sense of purpose, on and on and on. But I soon realized that technique was actually counterproductive, meaning that what I was saying to folks about employment had no place inside of the folks that I was talking to really resonate, because their experience was much different. Their experience was maybe discrimination in the workforce, maybe not being able to get along with supervisors or coworkers, maybe being fired 3 or 4 times. So what I was selling wasn't penetrating their own experience. And people will pay more attention to their own experience than what I was trying to sell. And so we really need to come up with a different way to speak with folks who have had some challenging experiences in the employment sector.
I think that introduction that you there leads right into the very next question that was proposed, which are, what are some of the strategies we can use to help people move past the fear of losing their benefits when returning to work?
Well, I think the first thing that we need to do is we need to sort of dispel some of the myths about going back to work. And I think there's a question in the chat box with Michael Wall sort of dovetails this, which is, the numbers, do you think that these numbers can also be as low as people are afraid to disclose that they have a disability? I think that there's a couple things. Number one, again, the work, explaining the work incentives in a way that resonate with people. And one way to do that is to really go into put a lot of effort into talking about work incentives. However, I have been to a huge number of work incentive trainings. I'm a certified benefits counselor, so I'm very knowledgeable in that area. But what I find is that people get way too much information, and that information is actually counterproductive. It's way too much for people to absorb. They just need a decent amount of information to know and feel safe that they're not going to lose their benefit. And I think talking about areas that affect their life is probably the second method that I would use. In other words, as I mentioned, when I was sort of the cheerleader for employment, I was talking about my own experience and how great work was, instead of asking about what are the things that are happening in your life that are because you're unemployed. And really, honestly, having difficult and honest conversations with people that make people a little bit uncomfortable. And not to say that, we really want to get down on people that are now working, but there needs to be a sense of uncomfortableness, a sense of dissatisfaction, because anybody familiar with psych rehab knows that people move and make change when their level of dissatisfaction is high. And so talking about things like unemployment and how it affects their life, and poverty and how it impacts their life, is really the gateway to talking about employment as a possibility, making people feel a little bit more comfortable. Yeah, to Michael's question, I do think that there are folks that are timid and have been timid about disclosing their disability. And I think that can be true in many cases. However, we are in right now an employee market. People are desperate to hire. And so people's disabilities are less and less a factor.
When you mentioned a second ago, you'd mentioned how you're probing into, things that make people uncomfortable as a way to help bring about that change. Are you helping them identify things that they themselves are already aware of and bringing that out? Or are you pointing out new things to them that they should be aware of? Does that
Well, actually, one of the tools that I use is actually the 8 domains of wellness. And I'm sure probably many people are familiar with that SAMHSA product, which really talks about the 8 domains that are a part of people's life, including a financial and spiritual and social and educational and what were some of the
Emotional.
physical?
It's emotional, environmental, financial, intellectual, occupational, physical, social, and spiritual. The SAM stuff.
Thank you. So that's actually a perfect tool to use as a conversational piece. So I used that once with an individual, and they were actually they had a goal, which was a social goal to find a girlfriend. And so we talked about how that might happen, and he couldn't figure out a way, to make that happen. He was 35. He'd not dated. And he began to ask me questions about, how I was able to meet my wife, court my wife, and I started talking to him simply about, taking her out for dinner, going out for coffee, all the things that you do in a courtship. And he said, I can't afford a girlfriend. And I said, I'm in the employment business, and I think that the way that we're going to have to help you meet that goal and get a girlfriend is to go to work, because you're much more likely to meet someone in the workforce than you are in this day treatment center. And of course, he ended up getting a girlfriend. But his need for the girlfriend at that point became greater than his fear of losing his benefit.
So delving into one of the verticals of finding work, AJ asks, do you have any specific strategies for helping get your foot in the door with employers?
Well, there's a number of strategies that I use, mostly all centered around the concept of social capital. And so I have a great deal of contacts. I know a lot of people from being in this business for a long time. However, all of my contacts are not good enough. And so I encourage teams of people. I happened to work in a day treatment program it was actually a personalized recovery-oriented services program, and it's a little step up from day treatment. Actually, it's a big step up from day treatment. And there were people on my team, nurses and frontline staff and record keeping and other clinicians. And I simply asked them, I can't do it all. I know you all have contacts that I don't have contacts. So what I'd like to do is this. When somebody comes to me and say they have a job or want a job in retail, I'm going to send you out an email, and I'm going to say, hey, do you know, or John Smith is looking for a job retail. Does anyone know a person that in your church, synagogue, neighbor, is a relative, a family member that is a manager, a valued employee, is an assistant manager who works in human services, anyone who works in retail? If you do, contact me. And so as a result of that method, I was able to secure other people and secure their contacts. So first time I did that, actually, I had a nurse tell me that her son was actually the human resource officer for Target. I said, wow, I don't have a contact at Target. And she said, well, I'll talk to my son. And she was able to talk to her son, and that was my in. I got talking to her, got connected with her son, and as a result, the gentleman interviewed for a position and got a job at Target. It wasn't my contact, it wasn't my connection with an employer, it was the team rallying around the idea and the concept of employment, and then moving forward with that contact to me, so that would be a much easier handoff than me going cold calling. There's many more contacts that everyone has, and that woman, by the way, she became a big cheerleader on the employment team. She had no experience with employment prior to that, but for those of you that are on the call that are employment specialists, you know that when you get someone a job, it's like the big day, or it's like scoring a touchdown. You want to spike the football. I mean, it's just a big celebration. And she got to experience that. So she was forever on the employment team after that. I'd go home at night and find 3 texts from her saying, oh, I was, at the 7-Eleven on the way home, and I saw that there was a help wanted sign. So, yeah, I think using social capital is the way to go. If you are looking at more specific ways that you have to do that cold calling, that's a whole nother question, and I could go into that if people like.
As I've done these conversations with different people, it seems like this process of building using those relationships, it comes up every time, and that it's a process that takes time, that it's not overnight, but as you progress in the role, that those relationships become stronger and that you have to, continue to build them the whole time. Jason asked a different questions about online application, and Jason asked, do you have strategies for navigating the online application process without getting lost in the shuffle?
That is a great question, and that is actually sort of dovetails with this whole social capital because some of those, those questionnaires are really designed to weed people out. And so I was having some difficulty with a particular Walmart, and I said, you know what? Anyone I'm sending through this portal is not finding work. They're not getting callback. And so I need to do something different. And I actually began a relationship with the manager of the nearest Walmart. And I had took him out for lunch and talked a little bit about what I did. And, I always saw ads for Walmart. And I said, we've got good candidates. They just can't get through your screening process. And as I began to know him and establish this relationship with him, at some point he just said to me, you know what, let's if you really think you've got a strong candidate and they're not getting through, just send them directly to me. So that's the value of social capital, that you can actually, because you know somebody, you can circumvent those types of online. Because let's face it, a lot of the people that we work with don't have a chance when it comes to those online applications because, again, they're all targeted to weed people out. And so whenever you're having some difficulty with those particular online entities, I would strongly suggest that you make a personal plea and appointment with the manager of the store and talk about ways that you might be able to circumvent that, or at least just start with a simple introducing yourself and learning as much as you can about that individual and starting to form relationships. Because in the end, the idea of social capital is that most of the general population find their work through social capital. Many jobs are not even online anymore. Because a lot of them are, especially in today's economy, they just want people right away, and so it's really important to get out there and to get to know people because there's that quote hidden job market. There's many jobs that get taken that way, and if you aren't in the social capital business, you just don't know those jobs. I'll give you an example. My last 3 jobs have not come about as a result of me looking online. They've come about as people telling me, hey, there's a job that they're looking for this. And it gave me a greater shot at the job. Certainly doesn't guarantee you the job, but they weren't even promoted, the jobs. And so I would have never even known that those jobs existed, including this one.
It seems like you're talking a lot about leveraging all the opportunities that you have available to you and not ignoring things that may not even look like an opportunity that someone else may know something that you don't know. And to that end, Austin asks, how do you establish a collaborative relationship as an IPS agency with vocational rehabilitation who provide the traditional supported employment?
That's a great question. There have been some states that have done that better than others. And I think it's those VR agencies that are open to some of the IPS principles, which let's just talk about one of them, which is rapid employment. And we know that the VR agencies tend to be a little slower. But some of the ones that have said, yes, we're going to adopt that as a principle of our own, it's much easier to form a relationship because you have that in common. I do know from personal experience working with OVR and working, not myself working for OVR, but working with them as an organization, that many times they're open to working with organizations if you can accomplish something that they can't in a more timely fashion. You'll still have to wait for them to get through their assessment process and their waiting list, things like that. But if you can supply of theirs and get it done quickly, they're more apt to form relationships with you. And again, even with somebody with OVR, it's about developing relationships with the individual counselors, so they'll be thinking about you. So you really need to get out. You need to wine and dine people.
All right, thank you. Pauline writes, our clients may need a supportive coach at the workplace from time to time to help with issues, but they do not want that support. how can we encourage them to agree to support to some support, from time to time? And at the second point, so that it's agreeing to the support. And the second question is, what should be included in a brochure you give to employers as you're trying to recruit them, to work with you as a provider?
Okay.
So two different
So
things
let's start
here.
with the latter question, and I get this question quite a bit in terms of like, what do you put on brochures and any kind of marketing material? So when I was doing some direct service, it certainly wasn't to our it wasn't to the person's advantage to have my main number on that card. Or on that brochure, because it was Evelyn branded mental health center, and so I was breaking their confidentiality just by having the employer call me back. So we decided to have a very generic looking business card with my cell phone, and then our brochures were all they tended to be a bit vague, but they were very detailed about how we could actually help businesses find high quality people. So they would be interested enough for us to at least sit down and for me to explain the services. It really wasn't about hiding anything. It was more about putting something on the things on the brochure or the flyer that would really get people's attention, so that we could at least have a phone call. Because when you have the phone call, or when you actually have a meeting, you really have the opportunity to change people and to be more persuasive. When you have it everything on your brochure, it can easily just be thrown in the garbage. And so I lead with less.
So before you move on to the other parts, would you say the purpose of the brochure is just to help, mold people? What they're creating it for is to get them to have the conversation with you? Is it to get them to make the call? Is that the best purpose?
Yeah, well, that's one of the purposes. But the other purpose is to draw a parallel between what they need and what we offer.
And then if you're done with that, on to the second part, which was for people who, Pauline knows needs help, but they don't want to accept help. How can you get them to work?
Yeah, so, here's the thing. I think that on many occasions, because I've seen this a number of times as well, you have a particular person that feels like they even maybe have had job coaching in the past, and they feel like this is a new job, I don't really need it, or I've had a job coach for a while and now I don't need it. And so there's a different perception. They have a different perception of themselves than what your perception. And while we all want to be very person-centered, we're both wanting success. We both have that as a goal. We want people to be successful in the workforce. So many times, I could talk with them about the benefits of having that person there, but oftentimes I've had to let them sort of experience sort of what would naturally occur if someone was there. And sometimes that would mean that they lost their job. And then we'd have an opportunity to talk about it. I think, in our field, we often try to make things as we're very risk aversive. In other words, we don't take chances, and I think that's because we're caretakers and we want to make sure that people are taken care of. But sometimes people want to go it alone. And as we could sit back and say, I know this person isn't going to do well without a job coach. Sometimes people need to experience that failure in order to be able to reach out and move forward. I know that's a tough answer. I wish I could give you a better answer than that, but that's what my experience tells me.
But do you have a phrase you say to someone who, you're kind of letting them go, knowing that they want to take that risk on their own, so they know it's safe to come back, when they decide they do need help?
I mean, of course. Yeah, there's always, I certainly always having to do with sort of respecting what your wishes are, and I really wish you the best. I want you to know that I'm there for you no matter what happens, and I'm wishing you the best. And if you need me later on, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'd love to call you in a week or two to see how you're doing.
Yeah, setting up a conversation point for the future, leaving it open.
Yeah.
Michael asked a really interesting question. He says, have there been any attempts to adapt motivational strategies used in other domains, for example, losing weight, quitting smoking, etc., to motivate people to consider pursuit of work? Are there any lessons here for us?
I haven't seen a lot of that, but I've I give a lot of keynotes, and in a number of my keynotes, I talk to people about what psychologists call the law of reversibility, which is this concept that you act in a certain way, and your feelings will follow. A lot of times we're under the influence of our feelings, and then we act in a certain way. So if we feel scared, we've got an interview, and we feel afraid and we're anxious, we're liable to act anxious. The law of reversibility says, hey, if you act confident, eventually your feelings will follow your actions, and you'll start acting confidently. And these are things that major consultants, major motivational speakers, they're simple theories that people talk about in terms of losing weight, in terms of getting ahead in the workforce. I mean, I've heard many major motivational speakers talk with people about this and get to have people see themselves a little bit differently. And yet we don't do that in our field. And these athletes and Hollywood stars, they're paying a ton of money to these people for their personal coach. And these are, I think, strategies that if they're good enough for football stars, and they're good enough for athletes and to improve their performance, they're certainly good enough for us to be talking more about with the people.
Right. Changing gears a little bit from the motivation, Allison asks, what is your suggestion for clients that consistently quit jobs after only 2 to 4 weeks of employment?
So let me tell you, first of all, David, these are great questions. You guys are so that is a good question as well. And, occasionally I've had a number of people that I've gotten jobs for and just didn't work out for whatever reason. But that, again, I sort of fall back, and this is something that I've done over the course of my time being in the field, is I begin to have conversations with people around the topic of, I've noticed that this seems to be a pattern of, every 2 to 4 weeks, you'll quit, and within 2 to 4 weeks, you'll quit the job. And so the conversation becomes about anxiety in the workforce, and that within 2 to 4 weeks, is when you first start a job, especially if it's a job that if maybe you haven't had in a while, and you start a job, the first 4 weeks are very difficult because you're not used to it. It's not a part of your routine. You're starting to feel out the workforce. You're starting to feel, what you don't know anything about the job. You don't know anything about the people. There's this extra anxiety that increases, and a lot of times for people with mental illness, it actually exacerbates people's symptoms. And so it's a very uncomfortable experience. And I prepare people with this information beforehand to let them know that you're going to feel a little increased anxiety when you start. However, after 4 or 5 weeks, this is going to become routine, just like today is routine, that in 5, 6 weeks, this is going to be routine for you. So what can we do to help you get through those first 2 to 4 weeks when you're going to feel you're at your most anxious? Because you're capable of doing this job. I know you can do it. I can see you doing it. But those first 4 weeks are going to be more difficult than week 5, 6, 7, and 8, and after that. So what are some strategies that we can work on together to get you through those particular feelings that you're going to have? It's really about preparing people ahead of time for those.
Just going down to the next questions, you've had so many great answers. I want to get to as many of these as I can. Glenn
Sure.
asks, are you aware of any funding available for temporary wages during an apprenticeship? Employment assistance and supportive employment funding do not provide for this aspect of job. And I can broaden it to just training in general too.
I'm not aware of any specific training or any specific pots of money available. I do know that different states, for example, New York has especially in the city, they tend to work with a lot of unions, and they're able to have a pot of money that can actually help people in clubhouses and who are actually working with IPS organizations to find work and to take part of training and actually get paid while they're doing it. But it really varies state to state. I really wouldn't want to answer that, and because the answer is actually so varied because it's different from state to state.
Okay, and
I don't
I'll
know
say
of any federal.
Go ahead.
I've said I don't know of any federal funding.
Yeah. I was going to say, for Glenn, if you email psyrehab, psyreh at bu.edu, we can try to connect you with whoever's in your state who might be able to answer that for you. Joshua asked, how do you get companies in small areas to assist with jobs? Kind of this rural creation for, the rural work.
That's another good question, and it's a question that I've heard oftentimes, that the needs of the workforce in rural America are much different than where you're in a city and you have a greater number of companies. So, and also the factor of people know everybody in town, and so you might the people that you are working with already might be known and might have a reputation. And so again, it just sort of goes back to relationships, and it's much easier to in smaller communities to be a part of the community. So if you are an employment specialist, you should really be involved with their local chamber of commerce, with the local business association. There's a small town where I live. While I'm from Rochester, New York, there's some in Monroe County. There are some smaller towns, and I always made it a point to find out what the local business association was. So for like Hemlock, New York, there was like a Main Street business association, and I made sure that they knew who I was, and I was able to get to know the employers in that very small town. Go to the holiday parties and things like that, and get to know them in a less formal way, and that they could look at me as a resource. And then also being involved with local governments, like the county government, because they know the jobs that are coming. A lot of times they're trying to recruit businesses to their area, and so being on different committees that helping to attract businesses would give you a leg up as well.
The next question comes from Richard, and he just wants to hear your thoughts on how to handle cold calling. I'm guessing this is around recruiting employers.
Yeah. Honestly, I try to avoid cold calling as much as possible. It doesn't really lead, for me, it's never led too much. Just haven't done it. Now, there might be a time that I'm cold calling. I might go to, I don't know, a place that I do business with, and might start a conversation. But it's always targeted in that way. In other words, I would just say that my cold calling is always limited to people that I'm doing business with. So if I'm in a CVS, and I shop at CVS, or I have prescriptions at CVS, I would just have a general conversation with people on the floor, or the people behind the counter. And if I I'm picking up another product maybe that I special ordered from someplace, or I'm at the FedEx office picking up a package because they missed me at home, I can have conversations like that, so they know I'm a customer. I'm something more than just a cold caller. I'm a customer as well.
It kind of leads me to the question of, in your experience in terms of efforts of building that network of employers, are there any sort of activities that have disproportionately successful in building that network? Did you understand what I'm getting at? In terms of the time you invest, what's the best way to invest your time in building that network?
Coffee. Just bringing coffee to people. Honestly, I mean, I worked in a hospital. I used to take the donuts and the coffee that the doctors brought and take it out in the community with me. I know the people that I worked with didn't like it, but if the doctor brought in a dozen donuts and 12, a box of coffee, I'd take it and I'd be running with it to the Dollar Tree or wherever and say, hey, love to bring this to you guys. I've been here many times myself shopping, and this is what I do, and those kinds of things, And then learning as much as you can about the business. Many times I'd sit and have conversations with people, and learn, especially businesses that are not that tend to be small business. Really talking to people about how they got into that business. What was it that? Because people love to talk about themselves, and I give them the opportunity to do that. Especially people in small business, because they have a lot of pride, and they put a lot of work into their business. And I'm always interested in. I'm just having a natural curiosity about how they got into the business, and what is it that they look for in an employee. I mean, Is it just that they just need a body, or is it a special type of person that they need? And if so, I would be more attuned to that. And people give you lots of information when you're showing interest in what they're doing. And actually, you can even in their office, you can see what's on their walls and what's important. So up here in Rochester, a lot of times I would go to a business person's office, and I'd find they're Buffalo Bill fan. I know you folks probably feel sorry for us, but it's a conversation starter, and we'd have conversations about the Buffalo Bills, and I'd in the course of our relationship, I'd text them and say, hey, did you hear that Jim Kelly's going to retire or whatever, just some little news, just to keep the relationship going.
Do you find yourself more successful working with small businesses, or is the structure that large and big retail employers and the larger employers easier to work?
I actually always found it a little easier with small businesses, because they're more likely to take a chance on people. They don't have to answer to corporate bosses or anything like that. So it was usually much easier to work with a small business. And when I'm talking small business, I'm talking a business of 25 to 50 people or less.
How can we empower families to take a greater role in helping their loved ones move towards employment?
That's a great question. Families play a very important part in a person's desire to go back to work. Many times families are just as afraid for that individual in terms of them losing their Social Security check and or just not being able to make it. So there's some real sincere desire to protect people. And so it's about talking with families about the dignity of risk, and to let the family know that here are the work incentives. This is how it's going to impact your son, daughter, loved one. And really letting families, when the person is open to it, you don't want to talk with a family until you get that permission. And then one of the best ways to help families realize the potential of their own loved one is to involve peers, because peers can come in and tell the story and share with the family how they were able to do it, and how they were able to overcome odds and are now gainfully employed. Their story is a powerful motivator in having families look at things a little bit differently. I have a mantra that I use, that it was actually a friend of mine, his mantra, who's just, I asked him one day, because he was so good at sales, and I said, how do you do what you do? And he told me, he said, facts tell and stories sell. And I said, wow. I said, that's your mantra? And he said, yeah. I said, then text that to me, because I'll forget it. And the more I began to think about it, the more it really had a place for us in our business, because I could talk about the great work incentives to families all day long, but it's the stories of individuals that have been able to actually make it that are the final selling point that people get and really resonate with people.
You brought up this idea of peers. Linda asked this question, right? I've been a peer in for 3 months now, and their intent is to hire me, and I've already filled out the HR application. I want to be a vocational peer specialist part-time, but all the jobs I see are full-time. And I've had other interviews, but nothing right now. I've had other job interviews and nothing out as an official job offer, and she finds it very hard. She asked, what can I do? And you know about the certificate in vocational peer support that the Center for Psych Rehab. So that last part I'll set aside for now.
Yeah. In fact, I'll let you take that one. But I will say this, that depending upon the state, of course, many states are starting to have peer specialists embedded in their IPS team or the supported employment team. Depending upon the state, depends really on the how far this has gone. But I know that there have been national discussions about the importance of having a peer on the team. Now, the question of full or part-time is an interesting one, because for the longest time we saw many jobs for peers. They tended to be part-time as a way to help people keep both their Social Security in a lot of cases, and also be able to return to work. But over the course of the last probably 4 or 5 years, I've really seen a strong move towards what you're unfortunately seeing, or fortunately for people that want to work full time, is full-time jobs for people that actually pay a significant a living wage. And so I would encourage you to think about and talk with a benefits counselor about the risk of working full time. If you think you can do it, then the only question for you is, am I going to lose my benefits? And if so, how long? If I lose the job after 6, 9 months, 12 months, 15 months, can I get right back on my benefits? So those are questions that you're going to want to ask the benefits counselor. If it is a matter that you think you just actually can't work right now full time, then that's a totally different question. But if you do think that you can, and you're just a little timid because of you want to stay on benefits, I'd encourage you to talk with a benefits counselor who can actually talk very specifically about your situation and how, in many cases, you would be able to, if you lost the job, you're safe. But without the details, I would encourage you to talk specifically to a benefits counselor in your area.
Now, you bring up this point that it's been an underlying thing that kind of carried on amongst the other conversations. People who are stuck in part-time because they don't want to, they don't want to bring up the conversation to move beyond that because there's this new permanent part, and they could really, return to work, but they're choosing not to. How do you start that conversation with someone who doesn't ready to even have that?
Well, first I want to let everybody in the audience know that Social Security actually just finished a research project, a bond project, where they did a study of people, as many people on the phone call in the webinar know, that with the SSD work incentives during the extended period of eligibility section, people face a cliff, basically, and this is why a lot of people stay part-time, because at the SGA level, which is substantial gainful activity level, during the EPE period, the amount is $11.90 to pay attention to. So if you make $1,190 for a month, you don't get your check the following month. If you make $1,189.99, you actually get your entire SSD check. So people face this cliff. And so this bond project was all about taking a look at people and comparing two groups. One group was kept in that same box of, you earn $1,190 and you just don't get your benefits. And the other group was taking a look at and had a different approach. So at that $1,190 level, after anything after that, they were able to keep $2 for every for every $2 they earned, $1 would be taken away. So it was a lot like sort of the SSI formula. So people could gradually wean themselves off rather than face this cliff. And next Wednesday on the 12th, actually, there's a webinar that they're going to be talking about what this study means, what happened, and I think it could mean some really good things, because I think what we're going to see is that with this extra work incentive that allow people to gracefully exit Social Security without that cliff, I think the data is going to show us that a lot of people left Social Security that were able to really take this to be a part of this bond project in that particular group.
Thank you, Len. So let's go on to here, and this one's about peers again. Is how can we use peers to effectively support individuals who are on the fence?
Yeah, so it's that mantra again that the stories sell, because peers are folks, and by the way, I'm a peer as well. I put that in my bio or not, but talking with people that have similar experience and that have gone through similar things really help people to trust that person at a deeper level. And that this is one thing that we've seen on supportive employment teams that have brought in peers, that even with people that have said yes to employment that might have a tendency to drop out, peers are able to sort of bring that back in and say, you know what, I experienced that same thing. I gave up, and actually, I actually came back because I found that that the fight for employment was actually worth it, and that I experienced a lot of rejection when I was looking for work, and after at the time it was uncomfortable. I didn't like it, but I've got to tell you, it was all worth it because here I am now, and this is my position, and this is where work is. I've discovered what work can actually be, but I had to go through it. I had to go through some of the tough times, and I've made it to the other side, and that's a powerful testimony to people. So that's the number one way that I have utilized peers and have been utilized myself.
Raphael asks, what is the best way to implement the IPS model in conjunction with the clubhouse?
Well, the clubhouse model is obviously much different because everything is done with the clubhouse model. It's you have everything is decided upon by all its members. So the first thing you'd have to do is talk with the members to make sure that there's buy-in for this IPS supportive employment. If there isn't, then you're sort of going against the what the members want. So the first step is just talking with members about what IPS is and explaining it and talking about the fact that it's a great way for people to actually find employment. In fact, it's the best way. It's research. We know that it's the number one way that people find employment and can actually make employment easier as a way to find employment. And then talking with, continuing that dialogue with clubhouse members. I don't think that they are ideologically different than one another. In clubhouses, you also have places that already exist. That you have the sort of the 6-month temporary sites and those types of things. But I think that the ideology is the same. So I don't think that there would be much difficulty in getting both to work in concert with one another.
Sure. Our time is running short. So what I'm going to do is there are some questions that have a lot of overlap. And so I'm going to try to create a giant question. And it's really a question about motivation. And it's people who lack the motivation to get started and how to engage them, whether it's, high school students, young adults, people later in their careers. How do you motivate people to begin the job search? And does it vary by the age? And if so, how do you approach it? Big question here.
Well, the first thing is to recognize that I don't think it's a matter of a lack of motivation. I think that it's a matter of not being activated in the right way. So just to give you an idea of how this plays out in my own life. So 7 years ago, I was 50 pounds heavier than I am today. And I was extremely motivated to lose weight. I desperately wanted to lose weight for a number of years. And yet I would act in ways that were counterproductive to me losing weight. It didn't mean I was not motivated. I definitely was motivated. You ask any person that's overweight, they want to lose the weight. They just haven't been able to activate it or found a way that works for them. And so one of the things that worked for me, and prior to this, again, having wanted to lose weight for a long time, I would join gyms as a New Year's resolution, and 3 weeks later, I'm on the couch getting a gym membership and eating a bag of Cheetos. However, I had joined many gyms in the past that just weren't successful until I joined a gym that really took an extra effort with me to support me. So it's not like I signed up for the gym and they gave up on me, because many places will. But they took the extra time with. They found out what interested me, and actually it wasn't exercise. They found out that I actually liked the sauna that they had, and they had the whirlpool, and they said, why don't we know you don't like to exercise because you've made it clear to us. Why don't we sort of bring these things together? So you exercise for 20 minutes, and we'll have make sure that there's time for you to spend time in the whirlpool or in the sauna, and then we'll buy you a smoothie after and get you used to some healthy foods, and you can get your vegetables that way, even though you don't like vegetables. And so then if I'd missed a couple of times, they'd actually call me and say, hey, do you need a ride? How can we get you here? So it's that extra support, and really not sort of labeling me with, well, you're just not motivated. You must not care. I think that's the first step. And everybody has some different ways. So what worked for me might not work for someone else. So paying close attention and getting to know a person in a very personal way, so you know what would work for them. It's much more complicated than just saying, well, this is the way to motivate. This is the way to get people motivated. It's really about how do you get people activated.
Great.
But I want to thank you, David, very much for giving me the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Len. It's 3:00, and I want to thank you too for answering all these questions. I feel bad that we couldn't get to everyone. And thank you everyone today for attending this Ask Me Anything session. The next Ask Me Anything webinar is with our very own Debbie Nicolellis. Thank you, and we look forward to having you join us again. Have a great day, Len, and very grateful for your time. Bye-bye.